Welcome grade 9s. We're just going to do a bit of factorization. We're going to do revision of factorization. Just to remind you guys of the different types of factorization. So number one is you get common factor. And common factor can basically be divided roughly into three different types. So the one type would be where you've got, for example, say 3x squared y minus 9y. So in this case, you're going to take out your common factor there of 3y, and then you're going to take your first term. Here you've got two terms, term 1 and term 2. You're going to take term 1 divided by your highest common factor, so that will give you 3x squared y divided by 3y, so that's x squared. And then you've got, in this case, it's going to be minus 9 divided by 3 gives you 3. So that's your answer. You can't simplify any further than that. Then the next one is where you've got brackets, and I think I'm just going to do it in a different color. So let's just do it in a different color so that we don't get confused. So the next one is where you've basically got brackets. The next two is brackets. So you can have, for example, 2x minus 1 minus 3x, x minus 1. So in this case, you've also got more than one term. You've got two terms, but your answer is going to be x minus 1, which is your common factor, and then left with 2 minus 3x. And then the third type is where it's also brackets, but there's one additional step. So it could be similar to the one on top where you've got 2x minus 1 minus 3x, but here you've got 1 minus x. So in this case here, what we did there was we said that minus 3x becomes plus 3x, and then you're then allowed to swap both of these around, so that becomes x minus 1. Because if you were to multiply this out and this out, you'll see you get to the same answer. And then you can basically take out x minus 1 as a common factor, and you're left with 2 plus 3x. Yeah, finally here you'd basically be left with x minus 1, 3x plus 2. So you got your x and number, x and number. Okay, so that was basically common factor, right? Then the next type of factorization that we did after common factor was dots, difference of two squares. Okay, so number 2 in terms of factorization is dots, difference of two squares. So in this case, you need to be able to first identify it. So how do you identify? So there's three things that you've got to look at. Number one is you've always got two terms. Number 2 is there must be a negative in the middle. And number 3 is that you have to have both terms must be perfect squares. And then when we solve it, remember we're going to have our two brackets. We're then going to have plus and minus. And then we're going to have the square root of term 1 over here, and the square root of term 2 over here. Okay, and I'm going fast with this, guys, but I'm just trying to do a overview of this with you guys. And then basically, so if we look at an example of dots, there's basically two types of examples. The one type of example is where we've got, for example, x squared minus 16. So there's just these two terms, the negative in the middle, both are perfect squares. When we do our answer, it's going to be a brackets plus minus. And the square root of x is x and x. The square root of that is 4 and 4. Okay. Then the other type of example is where you've got, for example, x minus 1 squared minus 36. Okay. So in this case, once again, you've got two terms. There's term 1, and there you've got term 2. Both are perfect squares, and there's a negative in the middle. Now generally what we want to do over here is maybe have square brackets to start with, and eventually we'll lose the square brackets. Once again, we've got a plus and minus. We're doing our answers now, brackets, plus minus. Square root of the first term is basically just going to give us x minus 1. Square root of the second term will give us 6 and 6. And then we can kind of get rid of our square brackets now. We can move to round brackets. All I'm doing is I'm just, sorry about that. I'm basically just trying to resolve the question. So it's -1 plus 6, so that's plus 5. And then we've got x minus 7. Okay, right. So that's dots. And then, right, so the third type is basically trinomials. So how do I identify it? It's basically in the format of ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, that's how we identify it. What you'll notice is there's basically 3 terms. There's always 3 terms. Tri means 3. And it's in this format, ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so that's trinomials. So if we have a look at an example here, if we've got a squared plus 3a minus 10, remember what we do in this case is we're going to first take out, we're going to have our brackets, and then what we then have is we've got c and b. So the first thing to identify here is what is a, b, and c. So a is the coefficient of the x squared term. So a is equal to 1 in this case, b is equal to 3, and c is equal to -10. So in our case, we can see here that c is equal to -10 and b is equal to 3. So something times something must give us -10, but when I add it up, it must give me 3. So in this case, we can see that's going to be 5 and 2. And in this case, the 5 has to be positive and the 2 has to be negative. Why? Because when you add it, when you multiply it together, it gives you -10. When you add it together, it gives you 3. So you're going to have an a over there and an a over there, and then we're basically taking our factors that we just found, and that goes over there. So it's plus 5 and minus 2. What is very important, guys, is that we are always starting with common factor. Okay, we're always starting with common factor. So I would just like to give you guys one more example with trinomials that combines both of these particular sums, or both particular types of factorization, not sums. So if we say 2a squared minus 16a minus 18, so what you'll notice with common factor is that it can be in any number of terms. So you can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms. If you got a common factor, when we speak about common factor, we're talking about the highest common factor. So remember, the highest common factor with your numbers, you're first going to do your numbers, and then you're going to do your variables. With your variables, it's always going to be the variable with the lowest degree. So what I mean by that, you'll see in a sec. So 2, 16, and 18, your highest common factor of your numbers is 2. In terms of variables, there is no highest common factor because there you don't have an a by the 18. But lowest, if you had, for example, a cubed here, the lowest degree would have been a to the power of 1. So a to the power of 1 would have been our highest common factor in terms of our variables. Okay, so we take out 2 as a common factor. So this gives us 2a squared divided by 2 gives us a squared. And then I've got minus 8a minus 9. And so now I can work with my trinomial. So I bring the 2 down. And so I've got a squared minus 8a minus 9. So the first step again, I need to find out what is a, b, and c. So a in this case is an invisible 1 over there. B is minus 8. And c is minus 9. I know that we don't need a at this stage, but next year when you do trinomials with a coefficient of 2 or more, then you need to use, we're going to use a similar system. So once again, we want to say what c is equal to -9. That's what we start with, c. And b is equal to -8. So something times something will give us -9, right? But when we add it up, it must give me -8. So we can see from here that will be 9 times 1. And we can see that because we must get a -8 here, it means that we're going to have to make the 9 negative. So in this case, what we have, we've got a minus 9 and a plus 1. Okay, so that's basically our trinomial. So far we've done common factor, dots, difference of two squares, trinomials, right? The last one, which is probably a bit tricky, the trickiest type of factorization, the fourth type of factorization is grouping. With grouping, there's basically two processes. Just to remind you guys, the two processes with grouping is, number one is you're going to start by factorizing. The way to identify grouping, by the way, is there's normally 4 or more terms. Okay, so grouping, there's normally 4 or more terms. Mostly there's 4, maximum 5 terms. So we're going to start by factorizing, but number 2 is it must also lead to factorizing. Factorizing. Okay, so you can start with any type of factorization, but it must also lead to a type of factorization at some stage. So if I have a look at an example on grouping, and I think we might have done this example previously, but that's fine. If we take 2a squared minus 2a minus ba plus b, you can either group 2 terms together or you can group 3 terms together. But most of the times you're grouping 2 and 2 if you've got 4 terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of group these 2 together, and we're going to group these 2 together over here. So I can take out 2a as a common factor here, and I'm left with a minus 1. And here I can take out minus b as a common factor, and I'm left with a minus 1 as well. So now I can see I started with a type of factorization which was common factor, and I grouped it. That's why it's called grouping. So step number one, if you want step number one is to group something together so that you can factorize it. Okay, so if we want steps, number one is to group 2 or more terms together. Number 2 is you basically factorize. And then step 3 is, so you factorize one process, like I said, and then after that, so this here is process number 1. Over here, let me just use a different color so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So process number 1 is when we speak about starting to factorize, we're talking about these 2 steps over here. So you've got to group 2 or more terms together, you've got to factorize them. That basically leads to another type of factorization. Okay, so you're basically going to do another factorization process. So if we have a look now, guys, what we'll see here is that my highest common factor here is now a minus 1, right? And then I'm left with 2a minus b, and that's basically my answer. Right, so that's basically grouping. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to give you guys 5 sums to do, and it's going to be a mixture of them. So you have to identify what type of sums. In fact, I'll give you 4 to do, and it's going to be a mixture of the 4 types of sums, and then we're going to do the answers for that. Okay guys, now that we've gone through the examples, if you can please just complete these 4 sums. The idea is to try to identify what type of factorization it is and then do it. And then we'll do some more exercises after that. Thank you. Please write the sums down, all 4 sums, and then click pause, try to do the sums, and then once you've done the sums, then you can come back and see how we do the answers. Thank you. So if we have a look here, if you guys have done your classwork, you can see here that in this case, by the first one, you can either take out -5 as a common factor, or you can take out 5 as a common factor. So if we took out negative 5 as a common factor, our answer would have been x minus 4y. So generally that would kind of be, we would take out negative 5 as a common factor. But in this case, it wouldn't be incorrect if you took out positive 5 as a common factor. Your answer is going to be negative x plus 4y, or it can even be 5 multiplied by 4y minus x. Okay, so all three of those answers are correct, but the more correct one is probably the first one. Okay. Sometimes this is just a skill in terms of, you'll see that when it comes to different type of factorization, or when it comes to more difficult sums, you might need to be able to use either of those options. I'm going to come back to number 2 because that's grouping. Over here by number 3, remember we said you've got to look at C. So C is negative 9, B is negative 8, so it's 9 and 1. So in this case the 9 needs to be negative and the 1 must be positive, because negative 9 times positive 1 gives you negative 9, but when you add it up it gives you negative 8. So in this case my answer is going to be x minus 9, x plus 1. If I have a look at number 4, you can see that it's common factor, and I'm left with x squared minus 36 divided by 4 will give me 12. Is it 12? 12. Nope, it's not 12. 36 divided by 4. So that gives me 4. Yeah, it's 12. 24, 36. No, it's not 12. 9. Oh, how did I get that wrong? It's actually 9. Sorry, guys. 36 divided by 4 is 9. But now what's important here is that you need to factorize this further, because x squared minus 9 satisfies the conditions for difference of two squares, dots. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to bring down the 4, and then we're left with x plus 3, x minus 3. Right, so let's have a look at number 2. So I haven't done the sum yet. So what we do with groupings, remember I told you we have to, step 1 is we have to group something, and then after we've grouped it, we've got to factorize, and it's got to lead to another type of factorization. It must lead to another type of factorization. So in this case, I'm going to group the first two and the last two terms. So if I take out 9 as a common factor here, I'm left with a plus 1. And if I take out minus k squared over here, I'm left with a plus 1 as well, because negative a squared divided by negative k squared gives me a, and then k squared divided by negative k squared just gives me positive 1, and negative divided by negative is a positive. So here once again I can take out a plus 1 as my common factor because I've got two terms over here, right? And then I'm left with 9 minus k squared. But what you'll notice is this 9 minus k squared over here, difference of squares, dots. So I'm left with a plus 1, and that is 3 plus k, and then that's 3 minus k. So if you only went up till for these two sums over here, you've just got one answer. There you've just got one answer. If you only went up till this point over here, it means you get a half a mark, and if you did that, you get another half a mark. I know this is not how they mark at school level, but just for the purpose of our exercise, I need to know how much you got out of 4. So over here you've got, for example, that you'd have gotten half a mark and half a mark, right? So guys, the idea really is to try to get 4 out of 4, and yeah, I'm going to focus on grouping next. Okay, let's do these 4 sums, please. Just write the sums down, and after you've written it down, if you can please press pause, try to finish it, and then you can come back to check if your answers are correct. Okay guys, I trust that you're done with that. So the first one, we can see that we're always looking out for what type of factorization we're looking at. So if we have a look at the first one, we've got two terms. There's a negative in the middle. Both are perfect squares. That's what we're looking for. Difference of two squares. And then because we've got a bracket there, we're going to have a nice square bracket over there. Okay, and then we're going to have a plus and a minus. And then the square root of x minus 4 squared is basically x minus 4. The square root of 9 is 3. And then what we do after that is we basically just, we're going to try and get rid of the square brackets. Now we're left with x minus 4 plus 3 and x minus 4 minus 3. And then we can just simplify. My final answer is going to be x minus 1, x minus 7. I trust you guys got that right. If we have a look at number 2, once again here, if I look at it, if I was to group term 1 and term 2, that's kind of not going to take me anywhere, right? So what looks like a better option here is if I take term 1 and I take term 3 and I put those two next to each other, and then I got term 2 and I've got term 4. So you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to move things around. Remember we said we need to group 2 or more terms. So now I want to group term 1 and 2. So I'm left here with 5p. And then if I take that out as my highest common factor, because I'm looking at these two, right? And then I'm left here with q minus 1. Now this I want to make this q minus 1 as well. So I just take out the positive there and I'm left with q minus 1. So I'm just swapping these two around, which I'm allowed to do, because minus 1 plus q is the same as q minus 1. And then my final answer in this case is going to be, you can see q minus 1 is my highest common factor. Apologies for that very untidy line there. Okay, so I can see that q minus 1 is my highest common factor, and I'm left with 5p plus 1. Right. Over here, I can see this is going to be, once again, its highest common factor. So for my numbers, it's 5. And my lowest degree over here is x squared. So it's x squared. I don't have a y in the second term. And I'm left with y to the power 4 minus 10 divided by 5, so that gives me 2. But now I can see, guys, they have got a dots, difference of 2 squares. So I'm left here with 5x squared, y squared plus, no, I don't have dots. Sorry about that, guys. I don't have dots because 2 is not a perfect square. So what I have there is that is my final answer. So if I can't simplify any further, then that is my final answer over there. Okay, right, like I said, in this case, yeah, that would be your answers. If I have a look at number 4, once again, we can see number 4, what I'm looking at here is I'm trying to group those two together, because those have 4 and 6, which is 2 is the highest common factor, so I'm going to put those two next to each other. So it's 4a plus 6ab. Remember, this is grouping. It's got 4 terms, so it can't be trinomials or anything else like that. And it's definitely not common factor. So I can take out, so now I can work with those two terms over there. Take out 2a as a common factor, and I'm left with 2 plus 3b. Okay. So because this is positive, I want to take out this is, I can either do 2 plus 3b, or I can take an extra step here and say, okay, there I've got 3b plus 2. So now I'm left with 2a, and I can just swap that around, 3b plus 2. Why? Because I normally would obviously have my my variable term would come first. So the term of the variable is 3b, not 2. And then I'm left here with 3b plus 2. And that's 2a minus 1. Okay, that's 2a minus 1. And that is basically my final answer. So I trust that you guys did well in this particular case. Thanks very much for listening up.